Today our guest is Claire Agutter. Claire is interested in anything that helps IT work better. With more than 2 decades of experience as a service management consultant, trainer, speaker, and author, she is the founder of Scopism, which focuses on publications, events, and consultancy linked to Service Integration and Management, SIAM. She recruited and led the team of volunteers that created the SIAM Foundation and professional bodies of knowledge and created the online SIAM community. In 2018 and in 2023, she was nominated by Computer Weekly as one of the most influential women in UK tech. It's my pleasure to have Claire today on this podcast. So let's start. Welcome to our new episode of the Value Stream podcast. Today I have the pleasure to have with me Claire Agutter. Hello, Claire. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
How are you today?
Good, thank you.
Okay. So Claire, you are, I would say, and you will have a lot of time to talk about that during the podcast, but you are one of, or maybe the only, I know, the first author of the SIAM method. And can you introduce yourself, please?
Yep, thank you very much for having me on the podcast. So my name's Claire Agutter. I've been in the service management space pretty much my entire career. So initially working in operational service management roles, moving from service desk into change management, into service management implementation. I've worked in consultancy and also service management training and education, but the most relevant piece I think of my bio here is my business Scopism, which I founded 6 years ago. And as you said, it's where we began the process of documenting service integration and management, so creating the body of knowledge, and then from that building out events, training offerings, and ultimately the SIAM community, which I dare say I'll touch on today as well.
Yes, I know that you are very successful in what you do. Congrats. It's
Thank
not
you.
always easy to be a successful person, and you deserve that because you're very hardworking on that. Can you describe SIAM in a few words? What SIAM is about and what is SIAM?
Okay, so SIAM is an acronym for Service Integration and Management, which is one of these long terms that we love in the IT space. And SIAM comes from the fact that everybody now has complex supply networks that they need to manage, mainly within IT, but extending out across the organization as well. So quite often when I introduce SIAM, I talk to service management practitioners and we discuss what happens when something goes wrong with an IT service. So, maybe the payroll system goes down. So, from a service management perspective, you've got an incident and you speak to the software team, and the software team say, no, software looks great to us. Have you talked to the network provider? And the network provider says, definitely not us, but you might want to check with the database provider. And the database provider says, no, but I do know that security were doing some patches last night. Have you talked to them? So that the more complex our services are, the more challenging it can be to manage end-to-end value. So what SIAM does is it introduces the concept of a service integrator, which is a logical entity. It can be tiny or enormous depending on the scale of the organization, that has responsibility for this end-to-end governance and management across all of the elements of an IT service. And I mean, that's the way to explain it to service management practitioners, but there's a different conversation that we can have as well, which is very much at the strategic level, to talk about the fact that actually this can revolutionize the sourcing approach that an organization has. A lot of if we go back 10 years, a lot of organizations were in these massive outsource contracts with a single provider, and some of it worked brilliantly, but some of it didn't work brilliantly, and the value that they were getting from that was quite poor. So sourcing has evolved to choose from multiple best of breed providers. But again, if we don't manage that appropriately, then we don't get the value for money that we wanted. So that there's kind of a tactical operational element that you can look at, and there's also a strategic element. But ultimately, it's about building the best services that we can, pulling in the best resources from the market, and being able to manage them and get value for money. And that's what SIAM does. It's an extension of service management into a multi-provider environment.
Oh, yes. Thank you very much for that. I think it's a very clear explanation. Also, I see that it's a recent move that you are part, or SIAM is now part of an ISO standard. Can you tell
Yep.
me more about that?
Yeah, so we're absolutely delighted about that, and I think it's important for me to say I didn't invent SIAM, I don't own SIAM. It's something that actually came from the community. What our role has been in has been kind of pulling people together to document SIAM, but that's really helped it to be more widely accepted. It's helped to have people look at it and find the value they can have from SIAM. And now the next step in this global recognition, this acceptance that SIAM is a really valuable management methodology, is the addition to the ISO 20000 standard. So there's been a team of experts led by Michelle Major Goldsmith from the SIAM side, but we've had Peter Mackenzie, Finbar Callan, Suzanne Van Hove's been involved as well. And they've been refining the SIAM concept so that they can become part of a standard. So at the moment, it's a guidance document that helps organisations adopt SIAM as part of a management system, but ultimately that will develop within the ISO space to become something that can actually be audited. So it's a real recognition, I think, that SIAM is being broadly adopted. It's now been consistently defined, so we can help organisations to adopt it and accelerate their learning curve, really.
Mhm. Brilliant. Um, you mentioned when you were explaining what SIAM is, SIAM and value, SIAM and value. Okay. Uh, in ISO 20000, if I start with this one, this concept of having a chain of supplier is not new. In ISO 20000, I remember that from the first version in 2006, that we already have this, this list of, or this, I would say, chain of suppliers and so on. And what does that mean for SIAM to manage this chain of suppliers? Does it mean that you need to be sure that in each part of this chain you minimize the value leakage, or does it mean that you maximize the collaboration between them? Because what I assume is that each supplier has always, whether it's a big organization or a small organization, its own interest that is not always the same interest as the service integrator or as the final user or consumer of the service provider. So what is the let's say the positioning of SIAM for that particular problem? Or you know what I mean?
I do, and you've hit kind of one of the sort of the key concepts of SIAM, which is how do we build a culture of collaboration and cooperation between multiple organisations who, as you rightly say, will quite often be competing in the broader
Mhm.
marketplace. So how do we encourage them to look beyond their own set of targets, their own contract, and look at the big picture? And this is a key part of SIAM, is about building that culture. So What the service integrator will typically be doing is working collectively with the service providers that form part of a value ecosystem. In a perfect world, which we don't get very often, but in a perfect world, what we'll have is service providers who have contracts that are aligned with the SIAM model. So you can really help yourself by starting with contracts that have collaboration agreements in them. They have targets that go across providers, not just between the customer organisation and the service provider. So ideally, you'll have a really strong contractual footing, and part of the SIAM body of knowledge is it includes some recommendations around contracts. But quite often, we're not in a perfect world, and we might have, some new suppliers who have the good contracts, existing suppliers who don't have the aligned contract, and internal teams as well. And it's an important point to remember for SIAM that we're not just talking about third parties. Quite often you will have internal teams who form part of this value ecosystem as well. And actually they might not be used to being managed. So the third parties might be very accustomed to, contracts, targets, whatever, but the internal teams are not always managed in that way. So we start from there. We start from the contract, but as every service management professional watching this will know, by the time you get to an argument where you've picked the contract up and you're going, yes, but what about this paragraph? Something's gone very wrong. So we start with the contractual basis, but really the work of the service integrator is about then communicating with the different service providers and encouraging this culture of collaboration. So, for example, say we have a major incident, what will typically happen in a SIAM environment is all of the service providers will come together, whether that's face to face or whether it's on a call, and they will collectively work to resolve the incident. They will not be looking and going, no, not my problem, must be somebody else's. They will collectively work, and it's only once the incident has been resolved that then there's an opportunity to look and say, actually, has somebody dropped the ball? Did somebody miss a target? But again, in a SIAM environment, it's not about finding somebody to kick because something's gone wrong. It's about, okay, so maybe this contractual target wasn't met, but perhaps rather than a penalty, that service provider will commit to investing that money to improve a service. And again, looking at this from the more strategic level, what you get within a SIAM environment is all of the service providers understand their little piece of the pie, but where they fit into the bigger picture as well. And they actually have the option to collaborate with other service providers to do something innovative or to improve the service. And again, when it's all working, what you have is this virtuous cycle where the service providers feel confident, they understand the future position, so they then contribute more, which supports innovation, which is good for the customer. So then that improves the relationship with the service provider, and ideally, this is how it develops. But it's people, we know people are difficult, so the service integrator has to kind of continue with that relationship management, building that culture. It's not something we can just sign a contract and say, yep, that's it, we've done.
Yes, you said it very well. People are difficult. I wish I would just work with robots sometimes. So you're right.
I'm waiting for a robot to do my job. People keep promising it.
Let me ask you a question about, for instance, a typical, I would say, one of the worst cases for people to use or implement. I don't know if we can say use or implement SIAM, because I'm always reluctant talking about implementing. For me, it's much, okay? But anyway, let's take an example. You have an organization, a state-owned organization, okay, which in fact is financed by taxes, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And this organization has a very strong purchasing or procurement department. The only criteria they have when they choose any provider, and not only for IT, is cost, price. They always take the cheapest because by the law, they don't have the choice. It's not that they don't want to have the best quality. It's just because for taxpayers, they can just justify always, you see, we take care of your money. We always choose the cheapest one. And then you are in this situation. How could you, in that very, very hostile environment, use SIAM? Sorry for the question, but it's a question that I wanted to ask you.
It's a good question, and I think, and again, from a value perspective, this is fundamental. There is a difference between price and value, and price and return on investment, and it's a real challenge. And I think the challenge comes from where we see SIAM sitting in the organization, because if SIAM is siloed within the IT department and just receives whatever the procurement team drop onto it and then has to make it work, they are going to struggle. And the service integration element will be much more labor intensive, because we'll have so much more to do to try and encourage these suppliers to collaborate. And I think you touched on it when you talked about the fact that we don't necessarily say implement. We never used to try and say implement ITIL, and the same with SIAM. And the conversation that addresses this issue is a target operating model conversation, and it's a strategic conversation. It's a board level conversation about what sourcing strategy do we want to adopt as an organisation, and then what are the consequences of that for procurement, for operations, for the service integrator? How does this move down through the organisation? We've got an online SIAM community that we run, and I'll share the link for you to share with your audience, because it's free to join. But we have we do events in there, and recently we did one about SIAM and procurement to look at actually, how do we build these relationships? How do we make sure that procurement teams understand what would be helpful from a SIAM perspective? And equally, how do we, from a SIAM perspective, understand perhaps some of the challenges that procurement are facing? Because there's always ways around things. So if procurement are very much measured on cost, perhaps we need to be much more specific as to how we write the tenders or the RFPs that we're putting out there, to make sure that we're getting something that will actually meet our needs. So that it's a problem. I hope it's a problem that we're moving away from as people focus more on value. But I remember early in my career, I worked for an outsourcing organisation, and we'd won a public sector contract that had been allocated on cost. And actually, the business model was that the contract was not profitable, but the outsourcer knew that once we were on site, the number of change requests, the number of out of hours, that would be what made the contract profitable. So I think you can save up front, but it costs you more ultimately.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I admit that it was not an easy question. So really, thank you for this one, for your answer. And you were talking about differentiating the value from the price, and so as our podcast is about value stream, how could SIAM support value streams in an organization?
So, I mean, this is my take on it, and I'm not a value stream expert, but for me, I think SIAM helps chiefly in two ways. One of which is to understand the value stream. So when we're looking at, here's the outcome, what are all the elements that contribute to this? SIAM can really help articulate that, because I still, sadly work with quite a lot of organizations that just don't have visibility of contracts, of suppliers. They've got duplication, they've got redundancy. So if we want to start to understand where we are, that's the first area that SIAM can be really helpful. And then the second area that SIAM can help is to optimize the value stream, because again, many organizations get they have lock-in with a particular supplier, or they've got a contract that isn't flexible that they've entered into. And really, with a SIAM model, what you should be moving towards is something much more flexible, much more scalable. It's simple to remove a supplier, it's simple to add a supplier. So if we look at a value stream and think, do you know what, it would really help if we just slotted something in just there, that the fact that we're operating along SIAM principles can really help us to do that. So for me, it's understanding where you are, and then it's being able to optimize where you are, and having the capacity to do that quickly and easily, so that you can then experiment, test new things, and move from there. And I guess a good example of this comes from the COVID pandemic, because there's a lot of organizations had to transform how they were operating during that period. And what you tend to find is that the organizations that had, quite combative, quite hostile relationships with suppliers
Mhm.
struggled, because the suppliers went, why should we? Why should we help go the extra mile? Whereas the ones that already had this kind of culture of collaboration were able to change, evolve the services that they were offering with the suppliers, and then go on that journey together with them. So it's a good example of how adopting these principles, adopting this culture, can support an organization, and help move it towards its strategic goals, and from a value stream perspective, help it deliver, but perhaps in a different way.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I would say it works also the other way around. When I ask you the question if how SIAM can support a value stream, in fact, the same question the other way around is still
Mm.
valid. How can a value stream support SIAM? And by definition, in fact, it should support it by default. Why? Because when you have this value stream and you have the different activities and you measure and you apply the lean principles on that, then you can literally visualize the different activities this chain of suppliers interface together,
Hmm.
and then you can better have an understanding about why they need to work together, where they need to work together, how they need to work together. And by default, by using a value stream, that can also help SIAM to be maybe better understood because you understand what you see.
Absolutely. And I think it comes back to that point about, we're not implementing SIAM, we're not implementing value streams. We
Yeah.
develop a target operating model for the organization, and then we look at what are the tools, techniques, methodologies that can help move us towards that. And there'll be elements of SIAM, there'll be elements of value stream, of lean, and it's how we draw on those, and kind of blend them together, which that's the value that the service management profession brings to an organization.
When I draw a parallel, or not a parallel, but if I use ITIL 4 to have a look at SIAM, I know that in ITIL 4 they mention SIAM, and they mention SIAM for a particular dimension, partners and suppliers. Does it mean that if we have these, 4 dimensions of service management, does it mean that we have to stuck or to, let's say, put SIAM into one box called partners and supplier, ignoring SIAM in terms of organization in people, or value streams and processes, or information and technology? I'm sure I already know the question, but I prefer to ask you.
Yeah, and I mean, we were really pleased to see Siam mentioned in ITIL 4, but the content that's in there is fairly brief, and we're all looking with our own lens. I'm looking from a SIAM lens and a business lens to a certain extent, and you're looking from the value stream lens. ITIL's looking from its own lens. My my take on it would be, actually, SIAM cuts right across everything, and there is there is a possibility to create a SIAM model only including internal teams. So, for a large distributed organization, you could use the SIAM principles to create this kind of culture and collaboration across internal teams. So, I think that the partners and the suppliers, it, yeah, it makes sense in a fairly simplistic way. But I think, if an organization's looking to adopt SIAM, if they think they recognize some of the challenges that we describe in the research that we do at Scopism, then the body of knowledge will provide them with much more detailed guidance. But I do think it's a positive that ITIL 4 is seeing SIAM as part of the scope of service management. It's just, I guess it's just a reflection of the increased complexity that we have in the management world as well. There's a lot of things to understand and be aware of, and in a way they all interlink.
Mm-hmm. And you really, I think, wake up or wake in many of us an interest to work in a SIAM space, or at least give it a try. If one of our listeners here would start his or her career after school and would like to know more, I would say, okay, I would like to work in this field in SIAM. What would you advise to this person?
So the one of the principles for Scopism, which is the organisation that I set up that owns the SIAM IP, one of the principles was that we were there to help people, to help management professionals. So we try and make as much content available freely. Quite a lot of our content is co-developed with volunteers, so we make it freely available. So what I would say to somebody is, read a little bit more, learn a little bit more. So again, I'll share a link with you to a blog about what SIAM is. But then if somebody reads that blog and thinks, yeah, this sounds really interesting, then you can join our online community. You can find the bodies of knowledge in there. There's a lot of SIAM practitioners in there that you can ask questions from and start to shape your interest a little bit more. If people then want to progress further, there are sort of formal SIAM training courses that you can take. So we partner with Exin in the Netherlands, who provide our examinations, but there is a SIAM Foundation certificate and then SIAM Professional. And of course, there are numerous roles within the SIAM space as well. So looking at some of the big service providers who operate in the SIAM space and looking for those sort of initial SIAM roles as well. One of the things that we find, we do a global SIAM survey every year, and we publish a white paper. Again, that's there in the community for people to read. But one of the things that we do tend to find is there isn't any standardization in terms of job titles in the SIAM space. So you don't start as a SIAM analyst and then move on to a SIAM manager or a SIAM specialist. That there are a lot of different job titles when we ask people out there. So sometimes it's a case of kind of looking through job descriptions to find those SIAM roles as well. But yeah, that there's a lot of exciting opportunities in the SIAM space, and very much global as well. So we partner with organisations like Infosys, HCL Software. They have enormous SIAM practices, and within them, they're looking to sort of develop and bring on SIAM people. So lots of things available for free. Start to read, start to do some research, join the community, get involved, and it's a fast growing area, so it's a good one to join, I think.
Thank you very much, Claire. It was really, 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 really interesting to listen to you. I really learn a lot about SIAM, and I'm sure that our listener will be very interested in knowing more about that, especially if it's free,
Yeah. Well, you don't have to commit anything just to go have a look, do you?
So this is your Christmas present for our listeners. And I wish you a very Merry Christmas in advance. I don't know if we have to, but I know that we are now nearly at the end of the year. So this is the season, the season greetings.
Yep.
And it was really my pleasure. Do you want to add something before we close our session today?
Just to say thank you for having me as a guest, and I will share some links with you to provide to your listeners. But I would say to anybody who, if you've got questions, come into the community, ask the questions, and we've got a lot of members who'd be willing to help and share their knowledge. So, don't be frightened. Just jump in.
Okay, so what is the best way to reach out to you? LinkedIn or the links you will send me?
So for me personally, LinkedIn, I'm still on Twitter as well. Still there. I think I'm still the only Claire Agutter on LinkedIn. So if you put Claire Agutter in, you will find me. So if you want to contact me personally, probably LinkedIn is best. And for the broader community, join us online and I'll share those links.
Thank you very much once again, Claire. Have a very good and let's say quiet end of the year, because end of the year for business owners is always all except quiet. So I wish
Hmm.
you
Thank you.
a quiet and also a lot of health. The only thing that you cannot buy is health. Remember that. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.